Hello and welcome back to AFI Doc's post-screening conversation for the US premiere of Watch the Sound with Mark Ronson. I'm joined by Morgan Neville and Mark Ronson. Welcome back, guys.
Hi.
How you doing? Hi.
So this project feels like a really fun masterclass of technology and music. And I'm curious about how did you both connect on this particular project, and how long have you been working on it?
You want to take that, Mark?
Sure. Well, I think that Kim Rosenfeld came to me and he said, I want to do a show about music. I'd done a TED talk about music a while ago, and he's like, I have no idea what it is, this show, but something in that vein, something educational that's fun, that teaches you, lifts the veil a little bit. And he instantly said, I would like to introduce you to Morgan Neville. And I was already a huge fan of Morgan's work. And I think that we just sat and brainstormed until we figured out how we could put something educational, super fun, with both music obsessives into this format, this episodic thing.
Exactly. So I got a call from Kim saying, hey, do you want to meet with Mark Ronson to talk about music? And the answer is yes. And figure out what a show would be. I mean, Mark is being humble, but he did this awesome TED talk about sampling and kind of about the intersection of technology and creativity. And it just seemed like that was the sweet spot for what this show could be. So we started talking, and then I think we even ended up doing hours of audio recordings, just recording conversations, which is the way I like to work in the beginning, just to like get it all out and think about things. And then we started shaping it into what became the show. And we had a bunch of great people helping us, Mark Monroe, who's amazing, and Jason Zeldis, and the whole team of people, Joe, Joaquin, everybody. I want to thank them for all their work on this as well.
And so what kind of, out of those discussions and recordings, what brought you to the idea of making the crux of the series really around technology and the tools and how it shapes the art form? Was there anything in particular that really set that tone?
I think we kind of just were thinking, like, we just really just talked about music, like Morgan said, for hours and hours. Sometimes we recorded it until we just kept thinking, like, what are the things we keep coming back to? What are the most important things that have really like designated how modern music, or music in the last 50 years, really sounds? And we came up with sampling, distortion, synthesizers, reverb, auto-tune, and drum machines. Now, of course, we couldn't be like exhaustive, but we knew that we could talk about these things and do really interesting things and talk to really interesting people with those subheadings. And the main thing that we kept coming back to was this very human element, that all these things kind of sucked until someone used it the wrong way. It didn't suck, but people didn't really like it, or people were like, eh. And then somebody does the wrong thing. Prince does the wrong setting on an old drum machine, or somebody plugs the amp in the wrong way, it comes out distorted, that suddenly everybody's like, oh, this is music changing before our eyes. And this kept being this running thread, this happy accident. And then that became its own exciting thing.
Yeah, and I think something we realized early on too is that this isn't the history of distortion or sampling, that you could write books about that. It's very much a subjective take on it. So, once we realize, like, Mark's our guide, so it's what's his relationship to this technology? What were the songs he listened to when he was young that got him excited? So with synths, starting with Duran Duran and all of these things, and Terence Trent D'Arby and all these people who may not start thinking about it at the beginning of a synth episode, but for Mark, that's where it began for him. So I think it's embracing the subjectivity of the telling, I think, was really fun for us.
Yeah. I think it's, I also really love how you allow space for the inventors of these tools to be part of this discussion, because like they have an opportunity to reflect on what they've done as well, and how they've changed and allowed people to experiment with what they've created, and be part of that process. Were they excited to kind of geek out with the two of you about it? Like, I'm sure they don't get that many interview requests, so.
I think they were. I think Mark was more excited to talk.
Yeah. I was like, holy crap, Roger Lynn, inventor of the Lynn drum and the MPC, is making me like an espresso, right? Because it was one of those things, you know, it did a lot of these interviews all around the world, flying around. That was one of the times, like, went straight from the airport to like a small town, from England to a small town in Northern California. I can't remember exactly where. And Roger Lynn, like my hero, is just like, you must be really tired. Can I make you an espresso? Like, you know, I was totally, yeah, talking to these people. And these people are like, you know, they say the most beautiful things. Roger Lynn, he's talking about his huge influence on hip hop. And he's just like, you know, you make the brush and then you let the painters do what they do. And it's like all these lovely moments like that. The inventor of the 808 drum machine has done more to influence pop music than anyone probably in the last 40 years. Just like, yeah, I just wanted to make something that like had a big low end that shook the house and some cool sounds. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I love that line that he mentions about the paintbrush and the artist. It's like, I think it's very telling of the creative process in general, and how technology continues to impact it. Morgan, sorry, were you gonna?
No, I totally agree. And it's this, what's interesting is what we call it watch the sound is, you know, so much of what Mark does and what producers do is not just about song craft and songwriting. It's about finding sound and how important sound is to music and that relationship. And that is driven so often, has been, by technology and the history of recorded music. And part of what Mark was saying before, the kind of the grand theme is accidents, you know, and our relationship to technology, you know, that again and again these themes come back, that new things come in. A synthesizer comes in and people freak out because they think there will be no more orchestras and people will never play instruments, and it's going to be the ruination of music. And then of course it becomes this democratizing force that allows a kid in their bedroom to suddenly have string samples or whatever. And it's just that story again and again, that something that feels kind of threatening and cold becomes something that anybody suddenly has access to something incredible with.
Yeah, and I think the idea of it's not just about the technology, but how technology is integral into music. And what I think is really interesting, and Morgan, you obviously have a love for music, and a lot of your work in film has been around music as well. But music and film are such creative art forms, and they have this unique connection with technology in the sense that there's this rapid innovation with tools, and suddenly your culture is changing around them. And these tools kind of force disruption, and they force, like you're saying, you know, they democratize the system and these industries. Have you, now that you've reflected on the history of this and, you know, explored these different kind of tools that in the series, what elements of innovation are you kind of excited about for the next stages of music? What's, you know?
I mean, I'll say just in my life, you know, when I started making films, you had to rent a really expensive, really kind of crappy camera to try and shoot something. And to edit, you would have to edit on a straight cut linear system. And like now, I can make an entire movie with this, which is insane. And it's the same for music. I mean, that ability, and part of it, I'll say, is we started shooting this, I think, in early, September of 19. And we were kind of halfway through when COVID hit. Mm-hmm. And kind of, you know, our ability for all of us to be making this, you know, in different cities, different places, on laptops, and then starting to shoot in different ways. And, you know, Mark was doing music in, you know, a bedroom in London. And then we were going, and we did one shoot where Mark was interviewing somebody. You were in New York, the subject was in London, I was in LA, and we did an interview. You know, this is early days of COVID. And then we, you know, once we started getting back into it, you know, we were able to get back into recording studios and things. But I mean, that was such a curveball, but in a way, I felt like everything that happened to the making of the show was reflective of what the show is about too, which is interesting.
Yeah. What about you, Mark? From a music side, are there any other new innovations you're excited by?
I mean, we really came to the kind of conclusion, or I did at least in the auto tune episode. And I, in the beginning, I wasn't a big fan of auto tune because I love like analog and great voices, the Arethas, that you know. And I always had a little bit of an attitude about auto tune, and then by having these incredibly like soulful conversations with people like T-Pain, like people who are like, without this, there was no way for me to express myself. And I feel like the things like that, the new innovations, T-Pain says something really beautiful because he's basically like the innovator of autotune to pop music. He says like he's working on new inventions because he believes like the next greatest song is in the head of someone who doesn't know how to play keyboard or guitar. So he's like working on stuff like how can somebody like hum a melody and build an entire arrangement, or literally like tapped into their head. So I thought, you know, I even came around to it being a little bit like looking down at some of that stuff, being like, this is incredibly like beautiful and soulful. And I think there's an episode about distortion, and that's another thing that comes out a lot in the show. It's like all these tools were the things that people used who felt like nobody was speaking for them. Dave Grohl talks about it. Kathleen Hanna talks about it. Like, this is how I was able to get out this thing. Like, no one would listen to me, so I got this tool. And I think that that's like this really, like, I was kind of moved when I was watching the edits of some of these things, because I wasn't, you know, you're not seeing it in real time. I'm like, oh wow, this is quite a lovely, deep message.
Yeah.
I have to give Mark props for the song he wrote for Autotune is like one of my favorite things. And it's one of my favorite moments in the series. And getting Mark to sing one of his songs was just such a treat.
I was like, okay, well, I guess if like, because I'm not really a singer and I work with great singers, I was like, if the whole point of this is that auto-tune can get anyone to sing a song, then I'm going to put myself to the test and I'm going to write and sing a song. And it was like, you know, I had some help from this great songwriter, Elsie, I work with, but it was like vulnerable and also ended up being something that I'm kind of proud of. And so it was cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. The audience, I mean, I think as an audience, we learn a lot through this series, but I'm curious about something else that what you learned or maybe surprised you while you were making it.
Morgan?
You go first, Mark, because I'm curious, because you'd never done anything like this before.
No. Well, I actually even just loved doing, like, I was doing sort of my own research, and then like Morgan or Jason or somebody would come to me, like I would see an edit and they had shoved in a fact or something about a person that I didn't even know that like blew my mind. And just everybody was so knowledgeable, and there was like actually just like technically stuff that I learned along the way that kind of blew my mind. And then I think just this idea, like I said, of just these things that like that I've always thought of as like technical devices, like, oh no, these are the things that enabled people to like speak and express themselves emotionally in a way that didn't exist before. I thought that I really took that away from the whole thing.
I mean, I'll say the thing that I always get excited about, it's like something that I've chased a lot in my work over the years, is creative process. Like, brilliant creative people doing what they do is never ever boring. Like, and even though I may not be recording music, I get inspired by watching people who are really good figuring out how to do what they do, you know? So it's something that I think we also realized in kind of chasing the show and letting it be organic and grow and say, oh, this kind of thing's good, let's do more this kind of stuff. And I think that's part of what we had time to do, was to really let it grow organically and figure out what it wanted to be. But there's so many moments where you see something happen and people get to actually discover something, you know, and that's part of what Mark does all the time. But it, you know, having the privilege of being able to see that, to me, is really exciting.
Wait, Morgan, I don't think I got to tell you this, but I feel like this is the ultimate compliment to our show. So Paul McCartney called, that's not something that happens a lot, so I don't want to say, I feel like I'm being like glib about that. And he called me, and my first thought was like, oh no, he's calling, like he doesn't like something in the show, we got to take him out. Like, I go into panic mode. He just called to say that he thought the show was so cool, and he loved the whole bit about Public Enemy and sampling and comparing it to what he did in the Beatles, and that he was inspired to take some of his old 45s and do some more sampling and like chop up some old reggae breaks. And I was like, that's insane. Like, Paul McCartney said that watching this show like made him think about a couple ideas about like how he wants to like make some new beats. I thought that was so cool.
I love that. I'm speechless. I mean, yeah, as a lifelong Beatles fan, that's insane. And I love the idea of Paul McCartney thinking and talking about Public Enemy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing. I'm curious for both of you, do you have like a preference on when you're listening to music? Do you have a preference on format? I'm obviously like there's a ease of use based on where you are, but like do you have a preferred?
For me, like I've DJed my whole life. It's been most of my livelihoods, and a bit like I, sort of ironically, I don't really ever listen to records at home. And then when the pandemic hit, I found so much time at home, and I find myself like listening to records like in the kitchen, cooking and discovering the joy and like discovering new stuff and things that I had known and forgot about. So vinyl is really beautiful in the way that like you really do put on something start to finish and engage. And then I also just love like streaming for just like I want to hear the new thing, or just for convenience, or you're in the car. But I am still partial to vinyl.
Yeah, I definitely got more back into vinyl during quarantine just because I had so much time at home, doing a lot of that. And then streaming and it's interesting, picking the right algorithms also that suggest stuff, radio stations, suddenly I'm doing like, the Modern Lovers radio station or Nina Simone or these kind of algorithms and I actually subscribe to all the streaming services. I'm always like experimenting, but I always love
mainly Apple Music, but mainly Apple Music.
Apple Music.
Exactly. You're right. Good, Mark. Yeah, so I'll take it where I get it. But I always love it.
Yeah, the algorithms are tricky. My algorithms end up being a lot of Disney favorites right now, which is a little bit of so I'd like throw in some Beastie Boys every now and then just to change it up. But
it's like we interviewed Damon from Galaxy 500. Remember them? This like college band in the late 80s. And so I put on the Galaxy 500 radio station on Apple Music, and it's like it's so specific and weird that you end up finding weird things you would never hear again otherwise.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm curious, as we're talking about this, are there any albums or particular songs right now that have been kind of on repeat for you that are inspiring you in this moment of 6 months into the year? Anything from this year in particular, or is it something you're rediscovering? That any music racks?
I think if there's anything that I probably like rinsed the most during COVID and really discovered is the jazz saxophone player Jerry Mulligan, who I had no idea about anything, but I saw this amazing doc that they remastered. Was it Jazz on a Hot Summer Day, about the Newport Jazz Festival that they remastered. So I was like, who is this like white blonde dude who's just blowing and like incredible? So I went into a full Jerry Mulligan deep dive, and then Bonnie Raitt, like Bonnie Raitt 70s stuff. I had never really known, like Angel from Montgomery and all the way up to whatever. And I've just like, that's really all I can listen to, those two right now.
No, and that song, John Prine, who is one of my all-time favorites, who wrote that song, who like totally do a deep dive. Like I had an experience last week, like this is such a cool thing you get to do occasionally, where I was visiting a friend I hadn't seen forever. And I mentioned Nick Drake, and he's like, who? I said, Nick Drake. And then we sat down and we listened to Nick Drake for like an hour and a half. Yeah. And he got to hear it for the first time. And it was like, it was such a cool thing. And he was like, oh my God, you just changed my life. Having those moments with music is just incredible.
Yeah.
I love that, Mark, that you just, the Bonnie Raitt right now. I'm going to tell my mom that later, and she's going to, because I grew up with Bonnie Raitt. Like that is, it's one of those things that she'll be like, that's so cool. It's such a communal experience, really. So
I heard Linda Ronstadt once say that, and a lot of people consider Linda Ronstadt one of the greatest singers of all time. She's like, but I can't sing like Bonnie. She can make it sound like an instrument or something. That's kind of insane praise.
Well, if you do an album with her, I will be first in line to buy it. just just a note. Well, I think we're gonna have to wrap it up, and I just want to thank you both for being here today and talking about this project. It's really fun, it's really cool, and I can't wait to watch the rest of it. I know that everybody at home, make sure to mark July 30th for the premiere on Apple TV Plus, because you're going to want to watch some of these other episodes, including Reverb, which I highly recommend too. So thank you, Mark. Thank you, Morgan, for being here. And thank you all at home. Stick around, watch more films at AFI Docs. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.